All right, folks, here we are.
Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. It's lovely to see you all this evening. I have my bishop ball cap on so we can play ball this evening. I want to start by inviting you to just take a breath, get here, and to survey your day and think about what great things happened in your day, what great connections you made, what great moments there were, maybe a great surprise that came, and lift those prayerfully, quietly, silently, but prayerfully as we gather, so that our time is full of the abundance of God's grace in our lives. I'm Bishop Elaine Stanovsky. I think you know that, and glad to be with you this evening for this second session of the Legislative Assembly for the Oregon-Idaho Annual Conference. And Adam Bridell is going to lead us through this evening, and I turn it to Adam right now. Welcome, Adam, and thanks for all the work that prepared for this time together.
Well, this is really a team effort. Thank you, Bishop, and thanks, Ethan and Laura and Kristen and Lori, just everyone who's been so helpful, and all of you for being here tonight. It's just so great to see your faces. It's so much fun. I'm so glad we're here. I am one of your legislative co-coordinators, and Ethan also serves as a co-coordinator and is willing to open us in prayer this evening. So I'll turn it over to you, Ethan.
Thanks, Adam. Friends, welcome. Let's be in prayer together. God of grace, we give you thanks from this day. We have come from our days of ministry, from all that has been before us. Help us to turn our attention to this work where we come bearing witness to your great work of love and justice in the world, where we come representing our districts, our committees, our groups of our beloved Oregon-Idaho Annual Conference. Help us to do this work well this night. And in these days following Pentecost, help us to be filled with your Holy Spirit, turning our attention to all of the wonderful things that she is up to in our lives, in our churches, and in this place that we all share. And so send us forth this night, filled with your Spirit, ready to be in conversation and community with one another. In the name of the Christ whom we follow, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Ethan. And thank you all for being here. We have a little bit of a wider circle at the top of the meeting because we have some of our legislative authors with us who will be sharing a bit about the pieces of legislation we'll be addressing tonight. But with their presence, we will go ahead with a roll call, and Laura will lead us in the roll call this evening.
Well, thank you, Adam. Most of you, or at least many of you, were here. Was that about 3 years ago at the end of April of 2022 when we met? It seems like a very long time ago, but it really is wonderful to see your faces again. We called roll twice during those 2 days, and it worked pretty well. So I'm thinking I'm going to use the same system. I will, what was that system? How did that work? I am still admitting folks in as they join us. I believe I said your role that gave you a little bit of a heads up that your name was about to be called. And then I called your name, and I think I gave you, by the second day, I gave you 3 words to use, a maximum of 3 words to use, like I am here, or God is good, or whatever 3 words you choose to respond to, which gives you practice muting and unmuting and lets us all hear your voice, and your little square lights up for a brief hot moment, and then we'll be on to the next one. So I know that our annual conference lay leader is willing to start us off. Paul Nickel, are you here?
Present. God is good.
Oh, Paul, that was 4 words. Oh, no. How about our associate conference lay leader, Sarah Richards? Richard, sorry.
I am here.
Thank you. And Board of Pensions representative, Steve Mitchell.
Juneteenth is coming.
Board of Ordained Ministry Chair-elect, Terry Watanabe.
Here.
Succinct and to the point. Board of Ordained Ministry Representative, Amanda Gale Reed.
I'm here.
Cabinet Representative, John Tucker.
With bells on.
Council on Finance and Administration Representative, Mark Bateman.
Present.
Core Representative, June Fothergill.
I'm here.
Core Representative, Funga Taufu.
I am here.
Ah, great. Cascadia District Clergy, Laura Beville.
Yo.
Okay. Cascadia District Clergy, Tom Orquiza Renardo.
I am here.
All right. Cascadia Lay Leader, Don Chassler. Don, I thought I saw her come in at one point. Maybe she got booted out. Well, hopefully she'll be able to rejoin us. Columbia District Clergy, Ted Myers.
Beautiful day.
Columbia District Clergy, Tilly Makepeace.
We are blessed.
Indeed. Columbia District Lay Leader, Cynthia McLeod.
I'm here.
Great. Columbia District Laity, Suzanne Wardenar.
I'm here.
Good. Crater Lake Clergy, Dave Childress was not going to be here, at least at the beginning. We'll hope he may be able to join us by the end.
Laura, I'm here. This is Dawn Chassler.
Oh, excellent. Great. I'm glad I didn't just make it up that you were here. Thanks, Dawn. How about Crater Lake Clergy, Warren Light?
Is that me?
It is. And are you feeling better, Warren? Yeah. Well, we won't get near you, so we don't get any germs. Crater Lake Lay Leader, Ria Gallo. Excellent. Sage District Clergy, Mike Connor.
Present.
All right. Sage District Lay Leader, Sharon Bryan.
I'm here.
Great. Sage District Laity, Carol Evans. I know Carol has been in and out a couple times. She may be having some internet issues. Ministry Leadership Team Representative, Wendy Woodworth.
Present.
Right. Board of Trustees Representative, Christy Deeren.
Hello from Blackfoot.
Okay. United Women in Faith President, Chris Mitchell.
I'm here.
Young adult Representative, Mario Estrada. I think Mario is not here. Now, is there anyone here that didn't have a chance to answer because I somehow didn't call your name? Go ahead and just unmute and say, hey, I'm here. All right. Adam and Ethan, I think we got everyone then.
Thank you so much, Laura. Again, thank you all so much. Just a quick overview. of our tasks tonight. Hopefully, you've been able to take a look at the packet of legislation that's on our agenda. We have 3 action requests that we're returning to from our previous meeting. And then we have a new action request and a new standing resolution to consider. We have shepherds for those pieces who will help us move things along tonight. First, we'll hear from legislative authors that are with us. And after a time of a presentation from them and an opportunity for some question and answer, we'll go ahead and excuse them from the meeting just to simplify our voting procedure when the time comes. You might recall it works best that if you are not a voting member of Legislative Assembly and you are on the Zoom, if you can turn off your video, that will help us count votes. And then the most effective way with a group this size we found to count votes is to just put your hand up until we ask you to put them down. And Laura and I will cross-check votes and announce for each piece of legislation the outcome. With that, are there any process or procedural questions? I guess that would be a way to test out the hand raise method. If there are any questions. Seeing none. Did I hear somebody there? Perhaps not. Cheers. Well, with that, we would move to a time of hearing from our legislative authors. And the first 2 pieces of legislation on our agenda tonight are AR5 and AR6. It's quite convenient. They share the same author, Jeremy Smith, who is with us. And Jeremy, we might give you 2 minutes for each piece. And with 2 minutes of Q&A, we'll try for that on each. So you want to start with AR5?
Sure. Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate an unexpected second time to share why I think these ARs are important work by Oregon-Idaho. First, I want to answer some questions that have been sent my way already about if anything has changed by the Judicial Council, our Supreme Court in the interim. And this is my interpretation is that Judicial Council clarified 2 things. First, it said that elections can happen in 2022, huzzah. And then the bishops scheduled that jurisdictional conference for the first week in November. This was left ambiguous in the original legislation as to the date because we didn't know. But I believe that Laura, when the notorious LJB went through it and set it to the preferred setting, that she corrected that in it. Second is that in a clarification, the Judicial Council said that bishops who face mandatory retirement are set based on their birthday in 2020, not 2022. So that means for the West that, according to the Episcopacy Committee, only 3 bishops are retiring or have announced their intention to retire. It doesn't affect the legislation before you because it says that all 5 bishops are set to retire by 2024, and that still remains accurate. The only one that it changes is in the notes at the end of AR5. It says that Bishop Carcano is going to retire now, but that the mandatory retirement at least has been set for 2024. And of course, if anyone on the call has other information, they're welcome to update it. So really, Adam, I'm happy to kind of do my 2 minutes for both, but the first AR5 really is applicable to this moment in time when we have a chance to envision something new. And even if and we can spur the first electeds to study this question over the summer and propose directions in the fall. We just did that this past year, so I know we can rise to the occasion. And then the second AR, a transitional class of bishops, I think is still a relevant request. That again came from your duly elected delegations multiple times. And what this work does is try to make concrete the most disciplinary way to ask bishops to sign up for a transitional class. So I hope that you continue to see that both of these action requests really are a way for Oregon-Idaho to call the jurisdiction to keep alive these two conversations. And my hope is that we can make real what we have talked about, whispered about, and yearned for, and have it start with Oregon-Idaho. I don't know what my timing is, but I'm out of words.
Let the minutes reflect that Jeremy is out of words. That is a tremendous, remarkable moment in our life together. Thank you very much, Jeremy. This group almost fits on one whole screen for me, so I'm going to be looking for raised hands. But are there questions for Jeremy while we have him with us? I see from Steve Mitchell.
Jeremy, I wanted to double check. Did you check into is it disciplinary to have bishops commit to only 4 years in that transitional class? Is that an appropriate thing?
A bishop can voluntarily vacate the office of bishop at any time. That is disciplinary. It is not disciplinary for us to require them to retire after a particular amount of time. The only way to, and so this, what this legislation does is to make it be a voluntary commitment, and hope to hold people to that if for some reason it turns out that that things go awry. So that is that's my answer, is that I made it as disciplinary as I possibly could, and I welcome any feedback on whether it is not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve and Jeremy. I see Warren Light and Mark Bateman. So let's start with Warren and then go to Mark.
Yeah, Jeremy, this is not a negative critique on the two pieces of legislation, but for the AR piece, it mentions that there's no cost. And my concern about this is that when you have networking, there is a cost one way or the other, whether it's to people going, from here to there, or to the ministry or whatever. And my concern is that we're not omitting costs and making people pick it up, as opposed to supporting them in this valuable work. Have you thought about that a little, or has anybody mentioned anything about, we could use a little bit of budget or something? I'm concerned that somebody's going to bear the cost and we're just going to get the benefit. I don't think that's fair.
Sure. That's a great question. I will say that is a change that Legislative Assembly made in between my original petition and the one that you all reformatted. That in my original one, I said that there was a nominal cost of sending an email and doing those sort of communications. So I acknowledge that there was going to be a little bit of a cost. The action requests only require budget consideration if those costs are coming directly from Oregon-Idaho. So the first AR requests that the first electeds as a group have, I believe Wendy Woodworth might be able to give some clarification about if the first electeds have access to a budget or to resources that could make this happen. And then the second AR is simply a notice being sent to other first electeds. And again, that's a nominal cost. And then of course, the listing of the most of the work is getting the email addresses for all those folks, which the petition author will provide to Laura. Thank you, Warren.
Mark Bateman, you still have a question?
Jeremy, I've got a question about AR6.
Great.
This reads to me as an implementation of a rule, including an enforcement mechanism, which Oregon-Idaho, in my interpretation, wouldn't have the ability to enforce on its own. And so my question is whether you actually intend this as an endorsement by Oregon-Idaho as a submission as a legislative request to jurisdictional conference.
That is a complex question, Mark. I don't know how to answer it. In my mind, it is simply a notice being sent to all of the delegations that they consider such a question to their Episcopal candidates that they have, or the ones that they're interviewing is, would you be willing to serve on the transitional class? And then we just keep record of that. And then future groups can do what they will. I don't see a need to make a rule or to make a particular petition because, again, there is no disciplinary enforcement. It is solely about, and I don't want it to be ruled out of order as creating a rule that is against the discipline.
So help me help me
yeah.
understand lines 19 through 22.
Great. Sure. It says that records of such letters of commitment are to be kept on file and made available by inquiry, and would serve as cause, and I would say by the jurisdictional committee on the episcopacy, if the letter of commitment is not upheld by an elected bishop. That is disciplinary because there is no listing of what are the reasons as to why a jurisdictional committee on the episcopacy can request, can pursue 408.3. There's no listing of like, you have to do these particular things. And so therefore, the legislation simply makes that note available. Again, it does not create a new rule. It does not create anything that's against the discipline. It simply serves as a reminder to the jurisdictional committee on the episcopacy that they can use that if needed. Again, that is a fail-safe, not a recommended course of action by any means whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Don't see any virtual hands up.
I see Wendy
Terry.
and Terry.
Oh, great. I see Terry now, and then Wendy. Great.
Jeremy,
Hi, Terry.
thank you so much for providing such succinct and clear explanations. I just have a question, and it's more about transparency. If we go to AR5, line 29, how are people supposed to know who the team of 10 is?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, that was a team that was created. I'm going to have to defer to the person after you, which is Wendy, who is on the team of 10 and can better answer that question. I'm not going to waste any time pontificating. But yes, she can offer clarification.
The team of 10 was a group of 5 clergy and 5 laity that were voted at a Western jurisdictional stakeholders meeting in November of 2019. I was getting there. I was about ready to say 2019. My memory was working. It's like one of the last things before COVID struck. So that's who it is. So it's folks across the jurisdiction, 5 clergy, 5 lay. I could name some of them, but I might not get all 10 because, it's been a while since the team of 10 was in existence. So that's who it is.
Since this is a letter, just to answer Terry, since this is a letter being sent to the team of 10 or to the first electeds, they would know how to get in contact with those team of 10.
Yeah, some of the team of 10 are first elected. Some are. So me, Jasper Peters, Dottie Escobardo, Frank, but she's not first elect. So there's a group of us. Kelly, Paul Cosgrove. Paul Cosgrove, I think, is on here. He was part of the team of 10. Joe Kim, Dale Witherspoon. So I'm not going to count whether I got all 10, but that's who we're looking at. So I just want to share, I guess, perspective as one of the first elected delegates. I know first electeds are, beginning to formulate what legislation do we need to potentially look at for Western Jurisdictional Conference. I think we're a little questioning what we have, what we're able to do at that jurisdictional conference just yet. So we're trying to figure out if legislation can be presented. And I think in general, we welcome more voices, sorting through all of the discussions that have happened over the last 2 years to come up with the best direction forward. So if this helps bring together the right group of people to help move that work forward, I think in general, the first electeds would be supportive of that. We want as many voices to be heard, as many minds and spirits working on the future direction.
Thank you, Wendy. I see June's hand up.
Jeremy or Wendy, I guess I would like to know a little bit of what you are picturing as the vision. I know you don't, I know the group's job is to come up with it, but I'm not sure what you're talking about, to be quite honest. What do you mean? What are you looking to do? Is that answer that, or is that?
No, I mean, Jeremy, do you want me to go, or do you want to go?
Please, thank you.
Well, I mean, there have been conversations for over the last year, probably 2 years, about what does the future of the episcopacy need to look like. And so there have been various work groups, study groups. That work that's been done is on the Western Jurisdictional website, so you can read those reports. We've had opportunities throughout the conference for people to read those reports and to give input. So the information is out there. Some of what Jeremy has in here, especially looking at AR 6 about the transitional class. That's not a brand new idea. It's an idea that's been talked about and floated around. So that's not a completely new idea. There's always a question of, is it realistic? It's, we can't, it's going to be difficult to make that binding if that's a direction that is desired. But there's been conversation around that. That doesn't mean everybody thinks that's a good idea. I'm just saying it's not a brand new idea in this piece of legislation. So it's something that's been talked about. I don't know if that helps, June. It's hard to do in a nutshell 2 years of lengthy conversations of multiple people across the Western jurisdiction. But there's 4 or 5 work group now, and the reports are all on the Western jurisdiction webpage. We've had videos about the work that's happened. So information has been out there.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, June. I'm looking across screens here for hands. We're at about time for Q&A on these 2 pieces. And I don't see any frantic hand waving indicating that there are additional questions. So with that, Jeremy, thank you. And thank you everyone for your good questions. Let's see, if we follow down our list here, we'd come to AR7, amending clergy housing standards. Mark Bateman and I spoke earlier today about this AR, but we did not talk about him introducing it tonight. It's been before Legislative Assembly for a minute, and Mark's name remains on it because once upon a time, this piece of legislation went through CFNA. And I know Mark and John have been working very hard on some next steps for this piece of legislation. But Mark, would you be willing to say a word at the top here?
I'll say a word. I'll let John chime in if I miss something that he thinks is appropriate at this time. So the legislation that you have in the packet is exactly what you saw in April. We have an amendment that we will bring, that John and I will bring when we're actually considering this. The substance of the amendment is basically to refocus this exclusively on housing standards, not the broader question of that would include housing allowances, which is dealt elsewhere in conference rules. It defines a parsonage as housing that clergy live in. If a church owns property that non-clergy live in, we say that's not a parsonage, but that all of the standards of housing quality need to be met within that dwelling as well. And this policy would apply to that, but it specifically says it's not a parsonage when clergy don't live there. And it says that anything that no one lives in that's used for other purposes doesn't count as clergy housing. It may be that the conference needs standards for those properties, but that's not appropriate for the clergy housing standards policy and should be dealt with elsewhere. So that's the basic gist of the amendment that we'll bring before you.
Thank you, Mark. And both Mark and John will be with us for the duration tonight. And so if there are pressing questions now, but we'll have plenty of time for engagement with them shortly. Good. Next on our list, Paul Nickel, did you need to jump in? Yep.
Yeah, I have a question of Mark. Why not bring the amendment to us now?
That up to you, Adam.
Well, no, we're not really. The bishop will move us through that amendment process, I suspect, here when we get there. So. Very good. The next on the list here is AR 9, amendments to clergy sexual ethics policy. And Laura's prepared to share a word and take questions.
Okay, this is the one that I gave you all a heads up about at the end of April when we met, because at that time, and the work is continuing, there had been a small group meeting for several months with folks from Cabinet, from Board of Ordained Ministry, from Safe Sanctuaries team, really working on what are all of the various ethics related requirements that are out there, what are the processes, and how can we streamline those and avoid duplication. So for instance, in particular, for pastors of churches who are going through Safe Sanctuaries requirements, but are also required to do ethics stuff based on the clergy sexual ethics policy, and there's overlap, and it's not, it's bumpy and awkward. In addition, we've realized, in particular, as we look at trying to have our practices not in conflict with P&W's practices, and I'm speaking especially around Board of Ordained Ministry stuff. We don't have a regular practice of background checks for our clergy or for others. Safe Sanctuaries does, but just in general for clergy, we don't. So taking all of that into consideration, this small group has been working on how can we synchronize these practices and make them effective, keep people safe, but also make the requirements not so onerous on our clergy and laity who are needing to do them, and make it much easier to track administratively, so it's not just a big tangled mess of requirements coming from here, there, and everywhere. So with all of that, what we discovered is that in order to implement the process, which is not yet finalized, but as we're looking at what seemed to make sense, we realized that we couldn't go any farther with the current clergy sexual ethics policy the way it is. So this proposal, this action requests, wants to change the policy to allow us essentially to go to an every other year rather than an every year model for clergy sexual ethics. We're also changing the whole title of it, in fact, so that it won't any longer be the clergy sexual ethics, but it will be about sexual ethics for all of our pastoral leaders, and that includes lay persons assigned, certified lay ministers. All of those persons would be cared for with these. As we try to implement this, we're looking at starting in the late spring of 2023, which means that we would be skipping a year. 2022 would be the year that we're skipping. In order to do that, we need to have the policy changed. So that's why we're bringing this before you. I want to stress that the process itself has not been finalized. So although at the end of this action request and the supporting information, when we're asked what's the cost, There is no cost to changing the policy. And some of you might feel like that's a little disingenuous because there probably is a cost to actually doing these things, which is true. It's the policy that needs to be changed first in order to allow us to really figure out how this process is going to work, who pays for what, who needs to do what and when. But in order to get there, it was almost like a chicken and egg thing. We can't do what we need to do until the policy is changed, but it's hard to change the policy until we know what the process is. So this is what we're trying to do in order to enable the process. You probably have questions.
Thanks, Laura. I'm watching for physical hands and virtual hands. I see June Fothergill and then Mark Bateman on that order.
Laura, will the process also come before legislation or not?
Probably not. The current process is not necessarily legislated. So it's going to be, again, Cabinet, Board of Ordained Ministry, Safe Sanctuaries, because we really want, as I say, to be coordinated with that, those folks working out how the process will work. I will add one other thing. It just that I've heard some concern, and there's been a longstanding concern from retired clergy who are now no longer active in ministry, but still hold that title of clergy and still need to maintain their covenantal relationship and their willingness to commit to the ethics standards of the annual conference. So we want to, as we work out the process, which is likely to ask for training sessions every 2 years, that would not be comparable to the whole big healthy boundaries training that we do right now once every 4 years. It wouldn't be the whole thing every 2 years. It would be more like half of it every 2 years. We've also learned some things about how to offer trainings online. So there will be ways to minimize the expense of those trainings, I believe, and minimize the travel required for them as well. And the Board of Ordained Ministry is really committed to supporting retired clergy with MEF monies who need to pay costs for these required trainings.
Mark.
Laura, my question was about the really tight time frame written into rule for those 3 things to be accomplished, particularly for retired clergy who could conceivably be away from home for easily an entire month, and a little bit concerned about locking that time frame into rule in that kind of circumstance. What was the thought process on saying it's only 1 month, and there's some pretty stringent requirements to take place during that month?
The thought process was because currently when those requirements take place, it seems to be haphazard. And that's not the fault of clergy necessarily, although as a clergy person, I will say that some of us are a little bit behind on getting those requirements done, maybe not meeting those deadlines very well. But it's also on the part of the administrative side, like, okay, let's put that letter out in November. Oh, this year, let's put it out in March. Oh, this year, let's put it out in February. So it's been a roving time. It would be wonderful to, I think, get that at a time frame that makes sense for new clergy who are coming in to serve appointments, and and folks who are being newly into our system. Sorry, that wasn't very articulate, but that late spring seemed to be like a good target date to get it in people's psyche that, oh yeah, this is the time of year we do those requirements and we do them every year. So that was the rationale behind actually printing a time frame. I do see your point, Mark, about, because I will say that the other thing we tried to do in crafting this policy is to make it work as a policy, but not make it so tight and specific that it can't be easily, it can easily accommodate pragmatic changes to the process.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Mark. Yes, Ted Myers.
Laura, I'm wondering if maybe what Mark was referring to is that those things being completed during the time of May 1st through May 31st, if maybe changing complete to report, that the reporting that these items were completed would happen between May 1st and May 31st.
That could certainly be a motion to amend when we get to that point.
Okay, thanks, Ted. Warren Light.
Yeah, Laura, I understand, if I understand this right, we're editing a portion of the policy regarding implementation so that the policy itself can be changed long-term with the process that's ongoing. If that, does that make sense? Is that what you're saying in a way? Because, yeah.
I think you lost me somewhere in there. I'm sorry for it.
Yeah. So the implementation part of the policy, and I think it's great that you're redoing the policy. The policy is really awful. I mean, it's not best practices, and I'm really happy that everybody's working on it. My concern is that under this implementation part, once this is approved, there's some ambiguity. Like, for example, and I sent you an email about this, for example, the piece about undergoing a criminal background check and records check. There's a lot of criminal background check possibilities and record check possibilities. Some of them are really horrible. Some of them are helpful. And I don't see anything here that says anybody oversees anything. Now, is that coming from another document or another rule? Is the Board of Ordained Ministry counting on the fact that they can just come in and add these things? Or is this what looks like it's going to be more final? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think you're making a couple of points, but I think overall what you're saying is it would be helpful to make it clear who has oversight for this implementation.
Right. I mean, because I don't see this as implementing something as much as suggesting this is where we're going to go, and there's some vagueness in that way, in that quote implementation. I'm just wondering if there's another document that says, oh, clearly this is who's going to be making sure that those background checks are universally up to the standards that they should be.
Right. I mean, I can say that practically speaking, it is the Board of Ordained Ministry who's working on that. But I've spent a lot of time in this little part of the policy as of late, not so much in the others. So I can't necessarily for sure say without looking at it more closely. And I see motion from Lori. She's probably pulling out her journal, which I know she has at her fingertips at all times. I couldn't say for sure whether or not that's outlined elsewhere in the policy. So that's a really good question to bring up.
Thanks.
Lori, did you want to chime in or later? Maybe.
Later. I'm looking.
Cheers. Oh, okay, great. It was in process. Okay, good. That's great. Thank you, Warren. Great. Other questions at this point? Yes, Tilly. You can unmute yourself, please.
Let me just make an observation, if I may, concerning Reverend Mark's comment about people being stuck in May. It doesn't prevent me from doing it sooner.
Yep, that's very fair, Tilly. Very fair. Thank you. I like the sound of Pastor Mark. We need to work on that. That's really great. And there are other questions? Not seen. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, friends. Very good. That moves us to SR8, our new SR, on our index here that's been abbreviated. That's COVID vaccine justice. I've seen Emily on the Zoom tonight to say a few words. Is Emily still with us? There she is. Excellent. Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be with you tonight. The reason that we brought this up, SR 8, as I now know its number, is because in our country, in the United States particularly, a lot of people think that COVID is over, or that it is somehow not as big a problem as it was, that we're moving from a pandemic into an endemic situation. In reality, that is not true for the rest of the world, where in Africa, for instance, only 5% of people have been vaccinated. And this Love Beyond Borders advance and program is about awareness, it's about advocacy, and it's also about fundraising to provide for the equitable distribution of COVID vaccines around the world. We believe that having the standing resolution come before the annual conference is one of the ways of raising the awareness and asking our churches to engage. And there are a lot of resources available, including curriculum for Sunday school and Vacation Bible School and all sorts of other things. Also, it won't be the pandemic will not be over until it's over for everyone in this world. And unfortunately, those that are most affected are those with less resources. They're more vulnerable. And so we call on our churches to engage and support this work. I don't know if there's anything else that you have questions about. I'd happy to answer those questions.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. And now I can leave, right?
Well, we might see if there are any questions for you.
Okay.
And up, Mark Bateman, please. Mark, go ahead.
Wait, do you have so line 24 says a recent analysis as a standing resolution that's going to be in the journal for an extended period of time. It would be particularly helpful for that to be a more precise citation. Do you happen to have that?
I do not have that citation, but I do appreciate your saying that. As I was rereading this today, I felt the same way about that particular item, Mark, and I certainly can provide that. I don't have it myself, but I can get it from David Bowen very quickly.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So do I just give it to Adam for an adjustment to this when I get it, the citation?
Emily, let's plan to check in on that, and yeah, in a few moments we'll move to addressing each of these pieces in their turn, and you and I can circle back based on the outcome of those conversations too. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Rhea, please go ahead.
I have a quick question. Under the how will it be carried out? I really appreciate the print, right, in the newsletters for conference and district. Is there maybe a suggestion to do like a ongoing printing so that it's an ongoing reminder to us all, or is this like a one-time print that we're thinking about?
I can guarantee you that it will be more than once. It will be ongoing. We already have been doing ongoing with United Methodist Communications as well as with Kristen here in our greater Northwest area. And we expect that we will continue and to raise awareness in ways that it is impacting folks. For instance, the impact on youth and children, young girls, early marriage. I mean, there is a whole lot of different impacts that we can take different parts of the year that are focused in different areas and write articles that support engagement in this way to share that information. So it's intended to be ongoing, absolutely.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Rhea. I'm not seeing any other hands this time. And so, Emily, we'll we'll release you. Thank you so much for giving me your time this evening. Grateful.
Thank you. It's good to see everyone.
See you as well. Friends, with that, we've had some time for Q&A around our pieces, and I might circle back to the top of that legislative list and turn things over to our bishop.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you all of you who have done the work that brings these proposals to us. So we will go back, begin again with action request number 5. And Paul Nickel, I believe you are the shepherd for this one.
I am, Bishop.
Is that correct?
That is correct. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of action request number 5, call for a jurisdictional episcopacy study committee.
All right, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? I see a second. So it's properly before you. And before we go into discussion, I just want to do a tip of the hat to Paul Nickel, who gathered and opened and kind of shepherded the lady session last evening. He did a great job. Good work, Paul. Yeah. So the motion's before you. Is there discussion? Now, I can't actually see everybody on the screen all at once, so I assume somebody's going to tell me if a hand is raised on the second page. Don't see any hands. So you're ready to vote? All right, so if anyone is here that is not a voting member of the Legislative Assembly, you'll recall that Adam instructed us to turn off your video, stop your video for the vote so that we can count. If you would do that now. That puts us all on the screen at the same time. That's helpful. So if you are in favor of action request number 5, will you lift your physical hand so that we can see it on the screen? All right, if you're opposed, would you lift your hand? And are there abstentions?
Bishop, we would report 21 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions, with a note that Amanda Gail Reed may be having some internet connection issues. I think her box may have just disappeared on us. We don't have a vote for her.
All right. Thank you. So moving on to AR 6. And Sarah Richard, I believe you're the shepherd for this one.
So go ahead, Warren, please. Yeah, Warren, I asked Warren. Sarah's been having some internet challenges as well.
Oh, okay.
Pinch hitting. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference action request number 6, call for an episcopacy transitional class. Sorry about that.
All right. This is there a second? I see Christy Deeren seconding. It's properly before you. Is there discussion? I see Mark Bateman.
Bishop, I'd like to make a motion to amend.
Mm-hmm.
I have just pasted it into the chat. I move that we delete the second half of line 20, starting with comma and through the end of that sentence in line 21, and replace with quote, and publish as a report to the jurisdictional conference 3 months prior to the jurisdictional conference meetings in 2024 and 2028 as appropriate.
So let me ask, Laura, are you able to get that from Mark and either put it in chat or share a screen so that we can see it?
It is in chat. Mark put it there. So anyone who can see the chat should be able to see that.
Okay, everybody's been able to access that in chat. Would you read it one more time, Mark?
Sure. Delete the second half of line 20, starting with quote, comma and through the end of the sentence in line 21, and replace with quote, and publish as a report to the jurisdictional conference 3 months prior to the jurisdictional conference meeting in 2024 and 2028 as appropriate. And if I have a second, I'll speak to it.
All right, is there a second to the amendment? I see Warren Light, I see Steve Mitchell too, so we got lots of seconds. Please, Mark.
So as you may have guessed from my question of Jeremy, I'm uncomfortable with the language that says this is justification to force an involuntary retirement. If the jurisdictional episcopacy committee thought that an involuntary retirement was appropriate for any reason, I'm working under the assumption that they know what valid reasons are for that, and they don't need to be reminded in this legislation. I do think that it's appropriate that if a candidate for the episcopacy has made a commitment of this type, that the jurisdiction be reminded that they made that commitment. And I think that that acts as a more effective enforcement mechanism on people who made that commitment, following through on that commitment. And it does it in such a way that it gives them time to announce their intent to retire.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Then we'll move to the vote. If anyone who does not have the right to vote would stop their camera momentarily. Steve Mitchell says a count vote is not necessary on the amendment. Thank you very much, Steve. We don't need to count this vote. So we're on the amendment. If you would approve the amendment, please lift your hand, your physical hand. All opposed, please, same sign. Any abstentions? The amendment is adopted, so the AR6 is before you as amended. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, if you are, now I need anyone who's not a voting member to stop their video, and we'll move to the vote. All those in favor of action request number 6 is amended, please lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions?
Bishop, we have a vote of 21 in favor, 1 opposed, and 0 abstentions.
All right, thank you very much. So AR6 as amended has been adopted for recommendation to the annual conference. Moving on to AR7, and I believe that Pastor Funga Tau Fo'u is our shepherd for this. Is that correct, Funga?
Yes, that's correct. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommends to the annual conference the adoption of action request number 7, and that is amending clergy housing standards and policy.
Thank you, Funga. Is there a second? I see second. It is properly before us. Is there discussion? Mark? Oh, and then John?
Go ahead, John.
Oh.
Okay, yes, we have 3 amendments. And I'm going to put one of them in the chat. That's the lengthiest one. So as Mark indicated, what we'd like to do is replace 1C in the policy because it has to do with housing allowance, and housing allowance is handled elsewhere under equitable compensation. And we would like to take this as an opportunity to get some clarity. And so what we'd like to put in at 1C is when church-owned property is used as clergy housing, it is referred to as a parsonage. Church-owned housing not used as clergy housing is not a parsonage, but remains subject to this policy. Property not used as housing by clergy or others is not subject to this policy. All right, do I keep going or do I?
Well, let's take these amendments one at a time. I think that'll be easier for us to know what we're voting on. So let's take this one. Well, you want to present them and then we'll come back and take them one at a time, vote on them one at a time.
Sure.
Why don't you do this? That'll give us the whole picture and then we can act on each part.
Sure. Okay. So the second one actually kind of follows the first, and that would be under 1D on page 2. We would like to delete the second half of line 8 and all of line 9 because what we just substituted up in 1C kind of resolves that issue, and so there's no need for it. And then the third one, and this is the one I suppose is a little different from the rest, we'd like to make a change to the actual policy and drop the word recommendations and from the second title, as well as words recommendation and suggested in the first couple of lines under the policy to actually make it a policy. It says recommendations and policy. It's either a policy or it isn't. So,
all right, you're way ahead of me, so I'm going to slow us down.
Yeah.
Go back to your second amendment. I never found my way there.
So that'd be 1D, the second paragraph. It's on the second page.
Got it?
Yeah, line 8. The second half of line 8, we'd like to remove, and then all of line 9. Because that is resolved by our substitution above in 1C. That sentence becomes.
So the sentence we're deleting is even if the parsonage is occupied by someone other than the pastor or is not occupied, this annual inspection must be done.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, and then on to the third one. Where is that?
So the third one, and this is why I say it's a little different. This is not in the action request. It's in the policy the action request is trying to amend. If you actually look at the housing policy
in the journal.
It has 2 sections. And the second section begins with recommendations and policy. And so we think we would strengthen this, which I think is part of the desire of the action request, by dropping recommendations and just have it be the policy.
So John, I'm going to stop you again.
Sure.
Do you have the journal page for that?
Yes, that is on page 47, conference policies.
Thank you. Everybody may not have their journal, but I do. I don't know. I don't know about the rest of you, but this confused me also about the sexual ethics policy, that we're voting on things that are in the journal, but that are not before us. So that's a little bit confusing to me. So, okay, I got my policy in front of me. Where are you?
So if you go down, yeah, so the section 2, recommendations and policy.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd like to drop recommendations and from the title. We would like to drop recommendations from Roman numeral 2, church-owned parsonage. And then the only other change would be so 2A2, suggested, drop the word suggested. And everything else can remain as it is.
All right.
And so we would suggest that, I mean, the changes that John just outlined are the equivalent of other changes found on page 3 in the action request. And so in essence, what we're saying is insert into the action request the additional changes that John suggested on line 17 of page 3 of the action request.
All right, the pages are not numbered, so let's just make sure we are all in the same place. The first page is the one with the title and the supportive information, correct? It says action request number 7. That's page 1 of this action request. Page 2, or are you talking about pages 1, 2, and 3 of the actual standards and policies?
No, of the action request.
Okay.
So the page 3 of the action request has on line 2 note for the rest of the policy.
Say that again.
Page 3 of the action request.
Uh-huh.
The first line is printed line of text is actually line 2 of that 3rd page of the action request. And it says note for the rest of the policy. So that's page 3. And what I'm saying is
I'm not finding this.
Mark, I think that's page 4 of the action request itself. Because there's the action request, which is page 1, followed by 3 pages of policy.
Sorry.
And you're on the last page of the policy.
Yeah, you're right.
Say again, now that we've all found it on page 4 of the action request, which is page 3 of the policy.
So everything that John said is in essence an insert line 17.
Okay.
To further amend the policy.
Okay, and we're going to take these one at a time. But I'm wondering, John, if, well, let's see if there's a second. Or we already seconded it, did we? There's a second. I see a second. So it's properly before us. So do you want to give us or you've already given us the overview of what these 3 amendments together are trying to accomplish, correct?
Yes, and I mean, I can say a word about why this was brought to us last year, and we postponed it for a year. And I can tell you a little bit of why that was done and why this is what our proposal is, if you want to hear it.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay. So we had a concern about church-owned houses that were substandard for parsonages, and that some clergy are then put in those substandard homes. But we also have churches that own houses that community groups meet in during the day, that it's not rented, nobody's sleeping there, nobody's dwelling there. And so initially the proposal would have required all of those houses to have been brought up to parsonage standard, which in effect may have ended some of the places where ministry was happening. So we tried to find a way to allow both of those things to occur while addressing the desire from the action request to make sure clergy housing was held up to the highest standard.
All right. So let's take them one at a time. Let's take the first amendment. and ask, this is the one that's replacing 1C. Is there discussion of this amendment? Not seeing any. And we don't need to count this vote, this is just on the amendment. So if you would support this first amendment regarding 1C, would you lift your hand? All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? It is adopted. And then there's the second amendment regarding page 2, 1D.
Yes, 1D line, the second half of line 8, beginning with even if the parsonage is occupied by, all the way to the end of line 9. Just
That's it.
eliminating that sentence.
Okay, thank you. Is there discussion of this second part of the amendment? Seeing no discussion, if you would approve this, will you lift the hand? All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? It is adopted. And on to the third one.
So the third one is addressing the second part of the moving policy that is found on page 47 of the conference policies. Dropping the words recommendations and from the title so that it just reads policy. Dropping the word recommendations from the Roman numeral 2. So it just says church-owned parsonage, and dropping the word suggested from 2A2 and just leaving it at minimum number of rooms.
All right. This amendment is before you. Is there discussion? Paul?
I have a question. Is that the actual language that's going to show up here, or is it going to be made to look like the language that's already on this page?
You want to try that question again? I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. I find the motion sort of wordy and confusing, and I'm wondering if that's the actual language that's going to be used here on the third page of the policy part, the fourth page of the action request. Will it be made to look like the language that's already there on that page, for example?
Well, if I'm understanding you correctly, I think just by dropping these words, it doesn't impact the sense of what remains.
Okay. Will this? Okay. I'll take that somehow this will get ironed out. Thank you.
Wow, that's a trusting soul. All right. Is there more discussion? I think you're ready. If you would adopt the third portion of the amendment, lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? It's adopted. So action request number 7 as amended, is before you. Is there discussion? Now I will ask any non-voting members to stop their video so that we can count the vote. If you would support action request 7 as amended, please lift your hand. All those opposed, same sign. Abstentions?
Bishop, we have a count of 22 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
All right, so AR7 as amended is adopted for recommendation to the annual conference. Thank you. We're doing great. You're doing great. We are now on AR9. And Terry Watanabe, I believe you are the shepherd.
Your Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of action request number 9, titled Amend the Sexual Ethics Policy for Clergy.
All right, you've heard this motion. Is there a second? I see seconds. It's properly before you. Is there discussion? Warren Light?
I'd like to make an amendment.
Mhm.
I put it into the chat a little early. I apologize for that. But on page 2, the dot point that says undergo a criminal background and records check, I would add the words as determined by the Board of Ordained Ministry. I just listed BOM, but that's what I meant to say, Board of Ordained Ministry. I'm hanging in there. So that's the amendment.
All right, is there a second to the amendment? I see a second. Would you like to speak to it, Warren?
Yeah, I just think that even if this is a process that's going to continue, that it sends a message back to the Board of Ordained Ministry and to the others who are putting this together, that particular issue needs to be overseen in a way that is responsible.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? If you would approve this, oh, I see Terry.
Thanks for that suggestion, Warren. I guess my point of clarification would be around the fact that that all 3 bullet points are actually part of the board's purview. So I'll just say that I think it would be worth stating that kind of in a broader sense, that all 3 of those things are part of the Board of Ordained Ministry. I wouldn't want it to be confused that just that first bullet is part of the board's responsibility.
So I looked this one up. I think this one is on page 41 of the journal. It's very difficult. I don't know how you all do this, to go back and forth between a full document in one place and another document somewhere else. So the reason I want to go back to the and it is the sexual ethics policy for clergy. That's the right one, right, Terry? I'm wondering if the responsibility is already specified somewhere in the existing policy. Warren?
Just make an observation that of those 3 dot points, criminal background checks and records checks are the one that is not coming from the Board of Ordained Ministry. The healthy boundaries is always led by the Board of Ordained Ministry. The disclosure forms are produced by the Board of Ordained Ministry. So they already have complete control on that. Background checks and records checks can be anything. I mean, I'm not even sure what a records check refers to without guidance. I mean, is it a credit check? Is it a criminal check? So that's why putting the Board of Ordained Ministry in that, I think, is really important. I agree that, that's it's in their purview, the whole thing. However, what isn't in their purview is mentioning a criminal background check and a records check. I have no idea who to go to or who they're recommending for this. That's why I brought that up.
Is there further discussion? Terry?
Yeah, thanks for that, Warren. So currently, the Board of Ordained Ministry runs the background checks. And this change the policy would change the timing of that and the requirement for that. And I also wanted to mention, just for a point of clarification, just due to bandwidth and ability, healthy boundaries isn't always going to be or has been boom created or run or led, but we have looked at online options as well. So I see that's a natural extension. I'm not saying that it's not important for us to reinforce the fact that the board will be responsible for choosing the type of check and also be responsible for overseeing the process for those checks. I just wanted to mention that the board is not always going to continue to solely source the training and these methods.
Mark?
Terry, did I understand you to just say that the board is responsible for the background checks?
So the board currently does background checks for clergy in this process. I think that
on all active and retired clergy, or just candidates?
Right now we do candidates and transfers.
And so in my reading of this was that it became the responsibility of the clergy to make sure that a background check was performed on themselves. Is that a misread? Is the board taking on this responsibility?
So that is the intent, is that the board will guide and oversee this process for background checks. We're not expecting clergy just to go get a random background check on themselves and submit that report to us. We will have a process. We will use the current process in place that we use for our candidates and in transfers.
And who is to pay for the board to do that? Because it says there's no cost, but this is a significant expansion of the number of background checks that the board would be doing.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So the Board of Ordained Ministry is it has budgeted and will, once the budget is accepted, will be taking on that responsibility. I think, again, the distinction is between the cost of this action request versus, so a change to the policy versus enacting the process. But I appreciate your distinction there.
So just as a process comment, no action request would ever have an actual cost. It's only ever the implementation. And so that line becomes meaningless unless we're talking about the cost of the implementation. And I certainly hope for our entire process that when we fill out that line on action requests, we're talking about what's the cost of implementing what's in the action request, or that line is meaningless to us from a legislative process standpoint.
Right, thank you. And right now, the specifics of who is paying for which part of the background check, that is still being determined. But we did want to be able to change the policy in order for us to move forward with that new process and the new delineation of who pays for what and when.
I see Warren.
Yeah, just one last time here. So as determined by the Board of Ordained Ministry will not take any authority away from the Board of Ordained Ministry or undermine the fact that they're doing all these other things. there are background checks for safe sanctuaries, background checks for a lot of different things that are done by different parts of our institutions. So I think this would be helpful in clarifying something that is, as it stands, very vague and requires another document. And I think this would make it much more clear to everybody in our conference, including lay and clergy people.
Terry.
I agree with you, Warren. I think, and this is just where I would have landed, which is to be able to insert the words as directed by the Board of Ordained Ministry up, prefacing all three bullets versus just that one bullet. And I know that's an amendment to an amendment, but I guess that would be, I think, my next offering once we deal with your amendment.
Ted, I apologize that I intended to call on you next and didn't. So calling you now, Ted.
That's fine. Terry needed to respond. Terry, I'm really, what you said about the board paying for the background checks and then saying that, no, maybe the board would decide that the clergy would pay for the background checks. To me, just sounds part of the problem that this is so vague that it almost sounds just ingenuous. So which is it? Is the board going to pay for the background checks for all the clergy? Or would each individual clergy be expected to pay for the background check, which actually the writing of this sounds like to me? You know, I can't support it one way or the other until I know which it is.
So can I just try, as I'm listening and reading, it sounds to me like this is an attempt to bring to the body a kind of an overview of the standards that are going to be developed, but the specific requirements and the details of implementation we're not there yet. I think I heard Laura say something like that, and I think I'm hearing Terry say something like that as well. And so, so I think, Ted, they're not asking you to know the specifics of the implementation. They're asking, is this the direction, is fleshing out this kind of skeleton, is that leading us in a helpful direction? Wendy.
Thank you. So I appreciate the attempt to try to streamline and have a universal way of having background checks. I wonder the issue around who's going to pay for it. Although we might not know what budget line item, and this is a informal comment that could become a amendment, which might not be quite the right time for it. But that said, I'm wondering if we can have a line in there that says the cost will be borne by the annual conference, because whatever line item it comes out of from the budget, it's annual conference money. So whether it's a boom budget, whether it's some other place in the budget, I'm not sure it matters, except we're just clear that the annual conference will bear that cost.
If it's vague, it probably needs to go to CFNA. I'm guessing. Mark? I see Mark's thumb.
What I was going to say.
And I raise that because I don't think it's right to say the cost would be borne by the clergy. So I want that piece to be cleared up.
Terry?
And I apologize if I gave the impression that the cost would be borne by clergy. I was trying to say that we have not yet worked out where the line items come from our board budget in terms for the background checks. The other item, particularly for healthy boundaries, for example, is supported by MEF monies. We can't use MEF money for criminal background checks. So it will come from some other place.
All right, this is before you. We're in discussion. We've uncovered some unresolved issues in the discussion. Is there further discussion? June?
I just wanted to add that maybe there also needs to be in your process what you will do if a background check comes with something on it.
Right, the issue of who receives the report and
what do you do?
right. And that's a hard one to answer because each thing that comes in is different. So there's not a simple rule. All right, I'm not seeing hands for more discussion. Are you ready?
There's currently an amendment before us, Bishop.
Thank you. And that is on page 2, first dot. So we're on the amendment that adds the words as determined by the Board of Ordained Ministry to the criminal background check bullet point. If you would, yes, Adam?
Thanks, Bishop. Sorry to interrupt.
Fine.
Paul Cosgrove in the chat is offering a consult, and so I just want to draw that to your attention.
All right. We don't see the chats unless you tell us because of who knows what. Our tech geniuses have us set up wonderfully, but not for this. So it's coming.
So it's a offer of help from Paul Cosgrove, who's just turned his camera on for us.
Okay, that's not showing up in our chat here, but Paul, I recognize you.
Thank you, Bishop. And I don't have voice or vote in these issues, but as CFNA chair, I want.
Let me just ask if anybody objects to Paul having voice. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
I wonder if a partial solution on the issue of the budget is that the clarification is that the individual pastor does not have to pay, leaving ambiguous who does have to pay, and therefore leaving that for further discussion in future budget discussions and negotiations.
All right. Did everybody understand what Paul said? What we don't have, based upon what Paul just said, is any language that would indicate that in the document. So the amendment is before us. Is that correct? I'm losing my way. The amendment is before us. If you would approve of the amendment to add the words as determined by Board of Ordained Ministry under bullet 1 on page 2. If you would approve that, lift your hand. All opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? The amendment is adopted. So the document is before you as amended. Mark?
I think what I'm going to do in this vote is abstain in a hope that this doesn't end up on the consent calendar, so that there can be discussion and maybe some additional thought in the next week about how to clean up and make more specific some of the language around budget issues, and without having to remove it from the consent calendar in order for those amendments to take place during the plenary sessions of conference.
Thank you. Mark just gave you a transparent explanation of what he's going to do, which helps you understand his strategy. Adam.
I just note that we do now have a rule that Legislative Assembly is free to refer a legislation on unanimously and at the same time have it not go on the consent calendar. So we are not bound by that vote should we want to make sure that an item comes before the body, even though it has our unanimous support.
And what's the process by which that would occur, Adam?
Acclamation affirmed by you, perhaps, but the rule is silent on how to actually implement that. But
you're saying that if the body adopted this with the margin that would normally put it on the consent calendar, someone could move after it was adopted to remove it from the consent calendar.
And not go through the steps of the 40 signatories. Yes, exactly right, Bishop.
Right. Okay. All right. Is there further discussion? Action request number 9 as amended is before you.
Bishop, there's a hand up.
Oh, I see. Christy, thank you.
I do have a quick question. Do we know of any conferences that have this practice in place that we might be able to use as resources?
Laura?
PNW conference does do background checks every 2 years for all their clergy. And in fact, that was part of the thinking in this process of trying to align our practices more closely with PNW's. I don't know how it's paid for.
All right. So anyone that's not a voting member, if you would turn off your video so that we can vote. All who would approve action request number 9 as amended, lift your hand. Hands down, all opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? All right, thank you.
Bishop, the vote is 19 in favor, 0 opposed, and 3 abstaining.
All right, and does that take us to the threshold that keeps this off the consent calendar?
Crunching some numbers.
Oh man, Steve's right about this. Steve's note in the chat. I don't know why I'm seeing chat now. Is that abstentions ought not to count in the margin, in attaining the margin for abstentions don't count in attaining the margin for the consent calendar. So I'm just going to ask, does someone in the body, Laura?
Sorry, I just wanted to see if I can pull it up, quote the rule that Adam was referring to. I think the Legislative Assembly shall have the option by majority vote of forwarding a recommendation with more than 90% vote, but not placed on a consent calendar. So I'm not the rules chair, but I think that means that we would simply take a majority vote as to whether or not we wanted to do that.
Can you cite the rule for me?
I can as soon as I get my chat window out of the way. 2.041, letter C.
All right, Mark.
So 2 things. One, Paul Cosgrove put in the chat that he disagrees with Steve, that abstentions are votes, so they do count. But forestalling that debate, I move that we forward this past request to the annual conference, not on the consent calendar.
Is there a second? I see second. It's before you. Is there discussion? If you would approve Mark's motion, would you lift your hand? Any opposed, same sign? Abstentions? It is approved by more than the majority. So we'll take that, we'll keep that off the consent calendar. Thank you very much. And Paul Cosgrove and I'll have coffee one morning and discuss the instructions that the bishops received from the professional parliamentarian about this. I stand to be corrected. All right. Does that complete our work?
Not quite, Bishop.
No, I've got one more. Standing Resolution 8. Is that right? Is that where you were leading us, Adam? Thank you.
Yes, Bishop. Yep.
And Rhea Gallo, I believe you are the shepherd for this.
Yes, Bishop. Hi, everyone. Woo, we're almost there. Okay. Bishop, I move that the Legislative Assembly recommend to the annual conference the adoption of Standing Resolution number 9, the call for local congregations to support the equitable distribution of COVID vaccines through acts to increase awareness, advocacy, and financial support.
Thank you. Now, I want to just make sure. I thought I heard Emily say that there was a correction and it's not 9, it's number 8. Adam, I'm turning to you for this.
I have it numbered SR 8, but we'll make sure that's right, Bishop.
Okay. All right. Well, you know where we are. Thank you, Rhea. And is there a second? Thank you. Everybody's getting ready to go home. It's properly before you. Is there discussion? Paul, Mark?
Bishop, I'm wondering what the process will be, or if there's a motion that's appropriate at this time, so that the request I made of Emily could be incorporated once we have that information. Does that require an amendment? Can that be an editing process before it goes to annual conference? What's the best mechanism to address that?
Well, let's just ask, would the body by common consent authorize Adam Bradell to add the information that Emily offered to obtain for us? Paul, is that a yes? Okay. So let me ask, is there any objection to authorizing Adam to act on behalf of the committee to make that editorial addition? I don't see any objection. Okay, Mark?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, standing resolution, the standing 8 or 9 regarding COVID vaccinations is before us. Is there discussion? Are you ready? All who would approve, oh, well, let's see. Anybody turn off your screens if you're not a voting member. All who would approve standing resolution on COVID vaccines, lift your hand. Hands down. All those opposed, lift your hand. Any abstentions?
Bishop, we count to 22 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining.
All right, so it is adopted with the editorial addition. And well, we don't need to go back there. So I believe that this completes our work. And Adam, you're also going to make sure that, well, you'll take care of it. I don't know how, yeah. I don't need to know. You're going to take care of it. You know what you're doing, and I don't need to know what you're doing. I believe that completes our work for the evening. Is there anything else that anyone needs to bring before the body? Then Adam, I turn it back to you.
It's only to receive my thanks for everyone's service this evening, and very good work, and look forward to being with you all again in our plenary.
So let me send you with a blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May she bring her grace upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Amen.
Man,
Good night, everybody.